Hi, welcome back to another episode of The Next Big Bet, a podcast series brought to you by Creddinv Technologies, where we speak about startups and startup investments. Today, I have Rashmi Shenoy, our guest. Hi, Rashmi.
Hi Divya.
How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank
Thanks
you.
for
Thanks for
joining us.
having me here.
Yeah, thank you. She is an expert in startup investments and she is a startup investor herself. So, today we'll be talking about the role of patience in startup investments because investors usually think about, am I timing the market right? Am I picking the next big thing right? And things like that. But do they really have the patience to see the next big thing coming to life? So, let's dive into that. To start with, Rashmi, do you think this trait of having patience is a really crucial one for startup investors?
Absolutely, absolutely. What we have to remember here is that unlike public companies who are reporting their earnings quarterly and have that quarter to quarter performance evaluation matrix, etc., being tracked, startups are constantly evolving, pivoting, and weathering uncertain conditions. So as other than giving them money to run the business, or we need to give them the space to grow and evolve, and therefore patience plays a very key role in startup investing.
That's really well said. Yeah, about the short term valuations, like you said, that doesn't really work with startup investments because short term valuations keep changing and sometimes it'll be down, sometimes it'll be up, and things like that. So, when it comes to that kind of patience where you can't really evaluate on the short term performance metrics, have to wait for a longer time. Do you think any mistakes that these investors do by maybe asking for an exit or asking for the interest rates or whatever that comes as a return with a startup investment, does that become a mistake? And
Yes,
what really
absolutely.
happens there?
Most common mistakes that we see are, like you said, focusing on the short term
Mm-hmm.
valuations, chasing quick returns because it's the startup and you are always thinking of those exponential returns, 3x,
Mm-hmm.
4x, whatever, right? Also, investors, I think, expect linear growth in a non linear space. That is also a common mistake that we see. We also see that they do some panic or desperate exits, like,
Yes.
like times of COVID, etc. An example that comes to mind is
Mm-hmm.
Airbnb. It
Yes.
had taken over a decade to build its
True.
business in terms of disrupting the whole hospitality industry.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of the COVID times, where there was a full shutdown on travel and all of that, a lot of investors were panicking around their investments in Airbnb. But it was one of the most successful IPOs that we saw in the decade, and it was bang in the middle of COVID, December
Yes.
2020, when it went live on Nasdaq and gained 112% on day one itself. So that's a perfect lesson to say that a disruption does not mean long term failure.
Exactly. Actually, patience does pays off really, really well, I should say. And I think I'm also seeing that in the recent news right now with companies like First Cry and Ixigo. They had been founded, I think, about 10 years back, and then only now have they filed for IPO. But that doesn't mean the investors aren't going to get any returns or they've been delayed a return. But the returns are coming in 10 multiples and 20s, things like that. So, do you have any examples that you would want to quote and tell us that investors, please have patience?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I think a case in point is Nika.
Okay.
They spent almost a decade painstakingly earning the trust of Indian customers, building credibility in the offline first model of business, which is kind of very hard to do. But eventually, patience paid off in the end because at the end of the decade, the early investors made close to 30 to 40 times of their capital invested. So that's a very good example that I always think of in terms of when you do things right,
Mm-hmm.
you do have a chance at exponential returns, not just
Right.
small returns. Again, another case in point is Flipkart. Axel's $1 million check actually became a $1 billion
Yeah.
return, right? So that's again in the face of uncertainty they stayed invested,
Mm-hmm.
where there was a lot of uncertainty around e-commerce business succeeding in a place like India, stiff competition from Amazon, fear of cash burn in a
Mm-hmm.
place like in a business like e-commerce. But it can happen when you stay the long course and stay the long run. So those are really good examples that I'm always inspired by, I would say.
All right. Okay, that's great. And also, do you think I am not really sure, but are there investors who've made the mistake of withdrawing the money or asking for the money back, and then they see, oh no, I shouldn't have done that because now the company is doing really well?
Yeah, happens all the time. I think case in point is also Flipkart again, because, like I said, fear of cash burn and success of e-commerce was very uncertain. So many investors did withdraw and felt the pinch. One example that's very close to my heart is my ownership in Chennai Super Kings.
Okay.
This was an IPL franchise, as all we know, as we all know, and owning a piece of an IPL team was a big high for me, and that too captained by Mr. Captain Cool MSD. But what happened in 2021 was they won the series, they won the IPL, of course, but Dhoni had turned 40, and there was a lot of buzz around his retirement,
Yes.
right? And me being a typical Dhoni fan, I felt like CSK will lose its charm and not be the same team, and therefore I kind of sold my holdings. But
Okay.
now when we see he's 44,
Yes.
still drawing stadiums full of fans, and CSK has also done very well from there on, right? I think it's a typical case of investors projecting their own doubts on the business, as we say, market sentiment in the retail
Yes.
segment, right? It's a typical case of that. But again, emotions should not override your view of the fundamentals and the business model and decisions, right? Especially in a place like IPL, it's all about profitability, sponsorships, popularity of the team, etc. It's not got to do with just one person. And Dhoni being Dhoni, I think he's also building a legacy much bigger than himself, right? So obviously that was a case in point for me. And a little personal secret here is that my personal brand, personal
Okay.
finance brand, Rupee Smart Drive, and also my name, Rashmi Shenoy D'Souza, comes down to RSD, and it's inspired by MSD. So I try to imbibe, being grounded and also keeping that calm demeanor through my process of investing and in life and money management, also in terms of coaching these days in my personal finance space. Um, when we look at Dhoni, he has a lot of these traits, right? Making good tactical decisions, the presence of mind
Definitely.
that he has, makes the best use of resources at his disposal, and also gets the best out of everyone, which I think those are the things that I'm looking to imbibe in terms of keeping patience, presence, and also perspective to prepare, plan, and prosper through the journey of investing. Because whether it's the field of cricket or investing and life, the principles to success are somewhat the same.
Oh, that's
Right.
amazing. That's a very
So,
good connect that you brought.
right. So
Yeah.
that's so therefore I think that exit stings me a little more than it should because of Dhoni. But again, it's a very important lesson and a very good perspective, because I think as retail investors, in the face of uncertainty, choosing to stay and having that discomfort, right? In that discomfort, you have to make the choice of staying.
Yeah.
Only with that will you gain the experience of building patience, because unless you make those hard decisions in discomfort and stay with that discomfort, you will never really build patience. So that's a real case in point.
All right. Okay. So you were telling, like, yes, it is very important to keep patience and things like that. And you did give me an example of how the person you love the most, you are a fan of, and you still decided to kind of take your investment back. What do you think are the other motivations for investors to keep the patience? If not that they really like the person, maybe the founder,
Right.
the startup that they invest in, there's the founder, and they know the person and they really know that this person will do something great in his startup. Other than that, is there any motivation that you think?
Yeah, to keep patience, I think it's a long game. See, also it's a skill that you have to build as an investor, right?
Yes.
So perceptions aside, you will have perceptions around the business model, the founders. You might be close to someone, you might believe too much in someone. So all these things aside, the way to build patience is to have a thesis around every investment that you make. also to sort of have certain KPIs for the long run that you
Okay.
track, and therefore shift your focus away from short term valuations,
All
because
right.
otherwise you tend to just over review your portfolio every now and then, and refreshing the dashboard doesn't really help, right?
That is
You'll
true.
see the same things. Also, it helps to build an investor network that is
Okay.
focused on long term investing and patience, because
Okay.
mostly the buzz is around short term, so you have to
Huh.
really find your tribe, so to say, to
That is
build
true.
patience. And what would help is to focus on the business model and focus on why you're there in the first place, right? You It's
Okay.
not just, like I said, not just giving money to a business, but also seeing what all do you expect that business to achieve, and how do you see your money growing, and how do you see the business evolving in that same phase and same kind of space.
Joining an investor community and talking to peer investors would also help. Do you think that will influence them to actually exit? Because there's something called the herd mentality, right? It's like, okay, my friend has exited and maybe my peer has got a better exit at this moment, so maybe I should also take my exit. Does that happen, and how does that impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Crowd mentality or herd mentality is a very common thing, and the buzz is sort of the loudest at the top, right? So it's very hard to not take action and sit quietly when you're hearing too many things around something, and everybody is talking about, how they've exited and made money or lost, or it's tanking, and whatever the news may be, right? So it's a very common thing, and we've seen this in cases like Paytm. We've seen this with WeWork as well, where people jumped for the buzz. It was Paytm, especially, was like the most hyped up
Yes.
IPO, and then it tanked 40% soon after listing. Nobody focused on the fundamentals. It was a major rush in and then a rush out by this. So it was crazy, bloodbath, as they say. And in terms of WeWork as well, a lot of focus on. The huge valuation, I think it went up to 47 billion in its peak days, when
Okay.
SoftBank was associated as well. But suddenly it had governance issues, the valuation tanked, and the IPO was a failure. So it's always a problem when you go with the herd mentality and lose your focus from the business. And like I said, having that thesis and having some KPIs for the long term is very crucial. But what is even more crucial is when you're hanging out with a bunch of people, or when you're hearing this buzz from the crowd, to keep your focus on those metrics that you've made for yourself, right? Because you should understand that everybody's investing goals are different, and probably they are looking for something else, and therefore they are exiting or choosing to stay or whatever. But you should know when it is right for you. To conclude this point, right, it's a typical, like, an analogy that I want to draw. It's the feeling of missing out. So in a flash sale, you might have
Yeah.
something in your cart, but is it really worth the price?
Right.
It may not be, right? So it's something very similar in a situation where you're following the herd.
Okay. Okay. Have you personally felt the pressure of exit?
I think it's very common in the investing space,
Okay.
especially when you start early on, right? You're not used to seeing your money go up and down every day, like, especially in
Yes.
the listed segment. That's where we all start off. So it's very hard to live with it, but you should understand that the businesses that you've chosen are probably for a long run, and your goals with that investment are for the long term. And therefore, you don't really need to check the prices every day.
Okay.
Right? So that itself is a learning. And in my case, I think there were a couple of examples, right?
Okay.
ICICI Bank, HDFC Bank. So I'm sure all our listeners will also relate here. These are two large banks in India doing pretty well, but both have been marred by, like, management issues and some compliance issues in the past, where you would see a massive sell off and a price dip in the market. So there was major panic, but I chose to stay on, and of
Okay.
course, it's reaping good benefits for me even now. Reaping good returns for me even now. I shouldn't say benefits. Being an investor, better to use the right
Returns.
terminology. And also, I think patience pays off is one lesson, of course. But personally, when it comes to me, I'm somebody who's actually bad at exiting, right? So I'm on the other end of
Okay.
the spectrum, because every stock that I put into my portfolio is kind of well thought of, and it's been nurtured over time. And certain investments have been so, what do you say, low maintenance, have paid you regular dividends, have appreciated over time.
Okay.
So it's hard to let go as well. After a few years, you're like, it has done well for me, and I'm finding
Okay.
it hard to let go. So as they say, buy and forget might be something that I've done passively.
All right.
I don't think it is the right thing either. right?
Okay.
You should be conscious and know when the business has hit its peak and it's kind of, plateauing, so to speak, and may not have more growth prospects from there on. So even though it's best to buy and forget at times, it's important to have a sound portfolio monitoring process in place so that you can deweed what doesn't serve you in the long run, and you can always keep your portfolio optimum in terms of its returns, right? So it's that which actually helps you build patience and also helps you nurture your portfolio.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much for sharing a lot of insights today. I think we'll wrap up the podcast. If there's like one last thing that you want to advise the investors about patience, what would that be?
Like we always know that it's not about timing in the market but time spent in the market, and time and patience are the real strengths and virtues that you can offer to your investments as the runway for them to really take off and defy expectations in terms of returns. So that's really the ultimate edge.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Rashmi, for joining
Thank
us
you, Divya.
today.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. Pleasure being here.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I think we have come to the end of this episode. I'll meet you in the next one. Thank you.